Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
And you're watching In Depth.
Now you know.
We're sponsored by our friends at the solar-powered hotels in Schaumburg, Illinois, the Fairfield Inn and Suites by Marriott, and the Town Place Suite Hotel right next door. They're both connected. They're both solar-powered. So today's episode of In Depth, it's kind of apropos that we have a red Model 3 on our intro because we have a red Model 3 race car.
It's true. It is at the mountain at Pikes Peak as we speak. It's actually doing runs as we're talking right now.
Yeah, so this In Depth is going to give you an update up till now of what's going on at Pikes Peak because the big race is this Sunday. So we thought we'd tell you a little bit about how this came about. So we met Blake Fuller at Fully Charged Live in Austin back in February of this year. And he drove all the way from Florida to Texas in his 2016 Model S Performance that he had already driven up Pikes Peak. And he came to meet us and to show us what the car could do.
And it was really exciting. First, we got to go to COTA and take a couple hot laps of COTA, which was really, really exciting in the Model S. I didn't know that the car could perform that well. And then we took the car in the dirt and did something completely different with it. We were able to go to a rally school and drive a performance Model S like a rally car with the same tires on the car. And that was an experience, let me tell you.
It really was. It really confirmed to me that Blake knows what he's doing.
So I had actually heard of Blake Fuller before we had gone to COTA. It's the one reason that I said, I think I know this guy, which is that he beat the EV production record at Pikes Peak back in 2016 with that exact same Model S. And I really wanted to see it.
Yeah, and Blake let us know that his dream was to then attack Pikes Peak in a Model 3 Performance and see if he could beat his production time. And he had the pedigree to do it. He had already done 5 previous runs at Pikes Peak. He was Rookie of the Year in 1999 when he went to Pikes Peak for the first time. And he had 23 years of competitive driving experience. He knew EVs in and out. Plus, he had started a battery company. He knew how batteries worked, and he really innately understood the electric car in terms of racing. Like when you were going around COTA, he was not only driving the car, but also telling you about what was going on with the battery system and the cooling. He really understood the car inside and out. The problem was,
we didn't have anything that we needed at all. We had a Model S, but we wanted a Model 3. And we didn't have a Model 3.
So we put out the word to you guys in the community that the thing we were missing here was a Model 3 Performance. And guess what happened?
EV Dave stepped up and donated his very own Model 3 Performance. I highly encourage you to go check out his YouTube channel. I think he has a Model Y Performance now. He does lots of autocross and stuff like that. But he really stepped up and was gracious enough to let us basically borrow his car for a race. And it's not the sort of thing where he just let us borrow the car like a week ago. He let us borrow this car for months.
Yeah. And not only just borrow it, we basically ripped everything out of the car and put in roll cages and sensors, and it's basically never going to go back to exactly the way it was before.
Exactly.
And yeah, I urge you to head over to his YouTube channel because he covers all kinds of things Tesla. I mean, he compared a Ford Model T to a Tesla. He shows you road trip videos, how Teslas work, how to charge them. And he's in this for the right reasons. He's basically the nicest guy you'll ever meet.
But it turns out that you'll need more than just a car. There's a reason why racing is one of the most expensive sports.
Yeah, we got a real crash course in running a race team when we found out that, so it wasn't just as simple as getting the car, which was amazing enough. We then found out that there's tens of thousands of dollars in other expenses. So yeah, you have to put a roll cage in the car. That costs thousands. You have to wrap the car. You need tires, wheels, brakes, OBD ports, telemetry, monitoring hardware, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention travel expenses, fees, and seats, and all that. So we were like, oh, crap, where do we get this money?
So again, we turned to the community and we said, if you would like to support this car, you can give us some money and we'll put your name on the car. Just like how on NASCAR, there's all these sponsorships from all these different companies and stuff. We wanted to have actual people's names on the car. And so we put out the word and thankfully, many of you answered.
Yeah. In fact, 150 of you answered. And so now there's 150 community-sponsored names on the car. And as far as we know, this is the first time in history at Pikes Peak, and that's a 98-year-old race, where a car has been community-sponsored to go up. So if you look at the race cars this year, you're going to see all sorts of big corporate names, like Jesse said. You're not going to see 150 names of people that supported the car. This is amazing. This is a grassroots support for the EV race car.
Now, I do want to mention that we couldn't do it all by ourselves. We did take some other sponsorships from some companies that you've never heard of and some that you probably have. So, for example, Martian Wheels. They're a company that make wheels specifically for Teslas.
Yeah.
So that was a great partnership, and we've so enjoyed working with Drew. He's actually at the mountain right now helping out.
Yeah.
We also worked with Toyo Tires because Blake ran his record-setting run on a set of Toyo tires last time. He wanted to run them again, so we reached out to Toyo. They were nice enough to give us some tires to run up Pikes Peak with, saving us a big chunk of change.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I learned about racing. I didn't realize how expensive these items are and how you need a lot of them. I kind of thought, oh, once you got 4 tires, you're good. But they don't last that long.
Right.
Not when you're doing what you do in a race car with them, especially all the testing. Blake got right to work back in February. Once we got the car from Dave, he got it down to Florida and started prepping it. So we decided right away to start a channel, the Electric Performance Channel, so we could share what Blake was doing to the car with you guys.
And we did this because we wanted the whole racing world, and even those like me who never really thought much about racing, to realize that the electric car is the superior technology for race cars and the future of motorsport. And people aren't going to know unless we go to races and win and set records. And that is what we are committed to doing.
We urge you to head over to the Electric Performance Channel and check out the Road to Pikes Peak, which is basically weekly videos showing you what we did to prep the car for Pikes Peak this weekend. And because we started reporting on what we were doing with the car to get ready for Pikes Peak, guess what?
What?
We attracted some attention, and 2 other competitors decided to join in at Pikes Peak. And at the discretion of Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, 2 Model 3s were allowed to enter the competition very late. And those 2 cars were both Model 3s who had heard about Blake from the EP channel. So those 2 teams were Josh Allen, who is the 2012 Performance Touring D champion. And by the way, he's a Pikes Peak rookie. And then champion driver Randy Popst, who is driving the number 42 car, which is a Model 3 Performance, with the Unplugged Performance team. So this is Randy's 5th Pikes Peak attempt. He came in 2nd last year at Pikes Peak in the exhibition class, driving a Dodge Charger SRT Hellcat. So that was pretty exciting, actually, because we were going to be the only, I think, electric car on the mountain, and then all of a sudden, we were one of 3 Model 3s, which was kind of great. But this question arose, which was, oh, so you're now racing against each other?
And no, we actually weren't. We were all in the exhibition class. However, Blake was going specifically after the EV production record, which meant that it was not the modified class.
Yeah, and this got me really confused in the beginning because I was like, wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah, in production class, you're trying to keep the car as stock as possible. This means you can't really touch the suspension much. You can't change out the brakes to bigger brakes. You can't adjust any of the cooling. You can't really do too much weight reduction in terms of, ripping off body panels and stuff like that.
Right, and it even limits your tire selections.
And the other 2 Model 3s in this race were the modified class. So they were able to have coilover suspension. They were able to put whatever brakes they wanted on the car.
Lighten the car.
Do lots of different aerodynamics to the car. And we were not going to be able to do any of that. So therefore, we weren't really racing the same race, so to speak.
Right. Just to give you an example, Randy's car drove with slick tires, which I've learned gives you like a 10-second advantage on the mountain. So let's talk about a normal race team. They're usually funded with hundreds of thousands of dollars. And just something as simple as moving a car around the country is pretty easy for a team like that because they'll either pay thousands of dollars to ship the car over land.
Or more expensive still, they might own their own truck and trailer and be able to drive them and the team and all the parts out to the race course, have everything that they need right there.
And so when we were talking about doing Pikes Peak, something that we learned kind of late in the game was, oh, gee, how do we get the car to Pikes Peak without spending thousands of dollars?
Right. We needed to save every penny. And so what did Blake do? He drove the Model 3 from Florida to Colorado, stuffing everything he could think of that he needed, including 4 wheels and tires, into the car.
Yeah, so Blake traveled the country, got to Colorado along with our team. And so our team arrived, and that included Dave, who gave us the car, and Blake, along with some really special people. So we have Kyle from Spec Motoring. We've got Greg from Otterbox. We've got Drew and Alice from Martian Wheels. Henry, Tori, and Victoria, and they all arrived in Colorado last weekend to get the car ready for tech inspection last Monday.
Now, one thing that EVs need at Pikes Peak that ICE cars don't is a noisemaker.
Wait, why do they need a noisemaker?
Well, most of the cars on Pikes Peak aren't, following the federal guidelines for emissions and sound. And so you'll hear a lot of these cars well before they round the corner. However, with an electric car, you don't have this. You don't have any of that noise.
Nope, it's quiet power.
It's quiet, nice, silent power. But this is a danger. Usually on Pikes Peak, there are lots of spectators. Of course, this year there aren't because of COVID, but there are many, many photographers dotting the hillside all the way up to the peak. And for safety, they need to have a noisemaker on the car, so that way you don't round the corner and run into somebody.
Right. So what we had on our car to begin with was a noisemaker, but it failed on the first test run.
All right, Blake, how'd that first run go?
Yeah, so we just finished our first run. There's only 2 cars running, myself and the Acura TLX. It went really well. Car felt good. However, we had a bit of drama. So with our audio warning signal, which was a horn that put out about 100 decibels or more, we had that switched on, running up the hill, and about 2 miles into it, it started smelling a little bit, should I say, electrical smoky in the cabin. So I also heard it audibly get kind of quieter, so I switched it off to see if it would cool off and reset. And by the end of getting back with the practice, we pretty much had a smoldering horn underneath the hood. So what's kind of cool about the next steps is to solve it, we are actually going to use the factory horn and use some zip ties around it, because you would never want to do that in a stock car, but this we can do it because there's no airbag, so we don't have to worry about it coming at us. So we're going to actually zip tie that bad boy, meet the rules, and then tonight go get something to replace it. But it's Pikes Peak, there's always drama.
There is.
Yeah.
It's always something breaks.
Exactly.
That's it.
But Blake really wanted to keep that Tesla T on the car. Unfortunately, now we had to zip tie something to press the horn the entire road up Pikes Peak.
And I'll tell you, I don't know that horns were made for being run for, 10 minutes at a time.
I think that's originally why that noisemaker failed.
Yeah,
it's
it
because
overheated.
you're essentially running a fair bit of power to something for quite a long time that
Right.
it's usually just supposed to be like beep, beep, or beep, not beep.
But you know what's cool about that is you get this cool Doppler effect when you're running it.
Exactly.
Doppler effect. That's so cool.
All right, so then on Tuesday, we had the first test day. This is on the lower third of the mountain, and this was a qualifying day. And what does qualifying mean?
Qualifying means that this determines your place in line for who gets to go up the mountain first.
So if you're fastest in the qualifiers, then you actually go last on race day.
Yes.
Interesting. And so there is some strategy here. Some teams try to sandbag, go a little bit slower so that they'll get to start sooner. But at the same time, if you go too slow, you can be disqualified.
Now, these test days are no picnic. You have to wake up at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
To get to the pits at about 5 in the morning to prep.
Oh,
Now-
and by the way, even at the lower part of the mountain, we're talking 8,000 feet of elevation.
Exactly. And you need to then be at the starting line by 5:30 a.m.
And keep in mind that gas cars on the mountain, they have a petrol station so they can fill up and top off, whereas EVs have no charging available.
Now, there is a supercharger in Colorado Springs, but it's over 30 miles away, or about an hour each way. So that kind of, you'd have to wake up at 1:30 in the morning is not really the best solution.
So, I mean, that adds a lot of extra thinking that an EV team has to do that an ICE car team doesn't, because racetracks haven't really thought about adding EV charging yet. And so an EV team has to think the day before, okay, how are we going to get the car charged? And then how are we going to get it to the mountain so that it's got enough charge? Now, we had hoped to have Spark Charge there to help us with their portable battery. Unfortunately, COVID popped up and made it so they couldn't be there. So we had to come up with another solution.
And we'll talk about that solution after race day.
All right, so here are the time results for day one, so you can see how everybody did. And keep in mind that we're not trying to win on day one, as much as what we're really trying to do is Blake is trying to figure out how are the tires doing? Is this the right set that I want for race day? How are my brakes feeling? Suspension? What's my strategy? And also, he hasn't been on Pikes Peak in 4 years, so he's just trying to reacclimate himself to the race course. And we're fortunate enough to have Kyle from Out of Spec Motoring there. So let's just go to Kyle Connor and ask, how are things going on day one?
Man, well, today was going really great. Everyone was ripping out of the gate. Randy, of course, was driving the unplugged car really hard. Blake was doing really well. And Josh Allen was cool. We didn't really see this car up until today. This was really the unveiled day. It had really cool aero on it. We weren't totally sure how it was going to perform, and I think the car actually was performing really well. Unfortunately, the driver, Josh Allen, it's his first time racing in Pikes, went through a section of road that looked similar to another section. However, it was a sharp left-hander, and we have some shots of it, not going off, but where the car was in the woods, and you could see it's just an easy driver mistake. Now, the scary part about this is they had to pull him out of the trunk, and what it sounds like was the frame was damaged. It was a hard hit. This is just what we're hearing, and even the manual release on the doors would not open the doors on the car. So this is a serious hit. Josh was transported to the hospital, so we hear that he's okay. But again, we haven't seen him. But definitely thinking about him. Hopefully things go well.
Thanks, Kyle. And according to the drive, Allen appears to have lost control at the end of the halfway picnic ground straight around the mountain's 10-mile mark, sliding off at the subsequent left-hand corner. His momentum carried him across a ditch outside the corner into the trees, though he evidently avoided collision with any of the pines. And so now there were 2 Model 3s at Pikes Peak.
Yeah, this was completely unexpected to me. I really had no idea that this early on. I kind of thought that you would save pushing the car until, the race day itself. Mm-hmm. So I was expecting everyone to just kind of, take it easy, especially on run 1. But yeah, he is a rookie driver, and also this is Pikes Peak. It's no picnic. And so, yeah, we're down to 2 cars.
So on the second day of testing, again, they started in the pre-dawn hours. And this was the upper section of the mountain. So this was a different section than day 1. And just to tell you, this section ends at 14,115 feet, the peak of Pikes Peak. Blake did really well. He was improving on every run. But unfortunately, Randy Popst ran off the course at Bottomless Pit and heavily damaged his car. Let's go to Kyle for that.
Randy's run, man, this is such a bummer this morning. We were up at the top of the mountain. Car had tire warmers on. Everything was looking great. Was able to get some amazing shots, chatted with the team and Unplugged. Really, everyone was feeling great. Came off a high from day one. You can hear Randy saying in many clips just how amazing the car was performing. The cooling system was working well, and they have a really highly modified cooling system. Unfortunately, though, today it was cold. It was about 49 degrees, high altitude. Randy went super hard out of the gate and I think had a little bit of overconfidence from yesterday. This is a section that's really fast, really bumpy, and you have some corners that can trip you up. And I think Randy came into one corner, hit some bumps way too fast, hit the side of a wall with the left side of the car, spun it all around. Some crazy photos of this amazingly captured by Larry Chen. And man, it was a hard hit. Car's completely twisted up, not going to run at all. Suspension bits tore up, chassis twisted. And thankfully, though, Randy is A-okay. It shows just how strong that Model 3 is, because any other car, I'm not quite sure it would have held up so well.
Yeah, it looks like, from what I've heard, Randy was pushing really hard, and he hit this part of the road where there's lots of frost heaves. And so almost every 2 years, they have to redo the road because there's these bumps. And he hit a bump, and it threw him off just for a split second. He had to correct. He overcorrected, it looks like. Yeah, and that's all it takes.
Right. And it's kind of interesting because some years ago, Pikes Peak wasn't fully paved.
Right.
So this top section, there was no pavement. It seems like the pavement certainly makes it more difficult, oddly enough. In a way, right. Obviously, you don't have to contend with sliding and slipping around on dirt. But if you have to deal with giant, frost heaves in the road, that can lead to some problems.
It also shows the strategy involved because, their team was using slicks. And, before we got into this racing team stuff, I didn't even know what slicks meant. But I've learned that basically slicks are usually used for drive pavement. And you could argue that maybe that wasn't a great choice here because, yes, it gives you better times. But if you hit any kind of road problems like gravel or bumps, you don't have much traction. All right, so then on to day 3, and it turns out that we're back to where we started almost. We're the only Model 3 on the mountain. In fact, we're the only EV going up Pikes Peak this year. And this is kind of why Blake wanted to do this, is if we weren't here this year, as of race day, there'd be no EV driving in the race.
Okay, so how did the runs? You did 3 today. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so again, we're in the middle section. We did the lower on the first day, upper on the second day, and this is our final third day of practice, and it actually went very well. I can say that there is still a lot of time left on the table from what we did today. We took it very conservative. If you can learn from your peers, obviously our peers, 2 of them are out because they pushed a little too hard at the wrong time. And our goal is to obviously finish the race and set the record. So the good news and the great thing to talk about is that when we add up the segment times, we seem to be on pace to be able to break the record, which is very exciting. We have had good weather each of the 3 practice days. We don't know what Sunday's going to be like. The Toyo tires did awesome. We actually did have a little hiccup with our tire warmers, which created, should I say, a compromise of how many runs we could do, but we got that sorted out, and I think all said and done, yeah, it was a good day. I'm a little tired from it's the continuous long non-stop weeks, but yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. And I think that's just kind of ridiculous. We have the technology to have high-performing electric race cars. I mean, for goodness sake, the fastest car that ever went up Pikes Peak was an EV. It was the IDR by Volkswagen.
Right.
So to not have an EV this year, after they had just obliterated the record in an EV, just seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, luckily we are there. And on day 3 of testing, you can see Blake's times. He did really well. He's on the middle course of the mountain testing on that day. And I just want to talk about, as you're seeing some of this course footage here, that a lot of you might be sitting at home right now going, this looks so easy. Like, maybe I'll become a race car driver. Because I know that when I'm sitting in my office watching this video from the driver's perspective, I'm just like, yeah, left and right and brake and a little acceleration. It looks kind of like what I do sometimes in a driving simulator. But then I remember that sometimes in a driving simulator, in fact, quite often, I just drive off the course and then I hit the reset button and then I do it again.
Or maybe, you know, in a racing game, there's the impenetrable guardrail that you
just slide along.
You slam into it 90 miles an hour and then just proceed to, you know, Newtonian physics bump right off of, and just there's some sparks. That is not what happens when you're on a real race course with a real car in the real world. Your car doesn't just kind of glance off something. It is now completely damaged and you can't drive it anymore.
The other thing is, when I'm doing a simulator, it's when I want to do it and I'm comfy and it's 72 degrees in my office. At Pikes Peak, you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
It's freezing.
You might not have got enough sleep. You're up on a mountain, so you don't have enough oxygen.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're doing all this with the sun in your eyes, perhaps, with animals crossing the road, with gravel and boulders falling onto the road. Like, there's just so many variables. And we get to sit at home and be like, yeah, I would have done it differently. But they're in a split second having to make those decisions. And I mean, there's no guardrails on most of this. So if you do something wrong, you could just drive off the mountain
and die. And many people have died driving off of Pikes Peak.
Yeah.
So the stakes are insanely high.
All right. So what lies ahead?
Today is the final optional test day that Blake is running as we speak. Sunday morning is the race, and I encourage you to head over to Pikes Peak International Hill Climb to follow, but we will have lots of updates and videos as soon as we can. Be checking out our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and the Electric Performance channel, so definitely, you know, head over there and go subscribe. But let's go back to Kyle and see what he has to say.
We're really seeing what's going to happen with Blake in the electric performance car. Obviously, it's a car I'm familiar with. You guys are familiar with as well. We've all been in it. It's a car that's relatively stock. This is different from the other 2 cars that we've seen. It doesn't have crazy aero, no crazy suspension, and that could be an issue on some of these bumpy sections, especially up top. The suspension's not able to work. The car's sitting really high. So what we're looking for out of Blake is just consistency, really nice, smooth driving, fast and quick. This is not going to be anything crazy, especially over the next couple of days of testing. We want to see him keep the car in one piece and go for a relatively hard run on the finish. But I don't think he needs to do anything crazy. It's the only Model 3 left on the mountain now.
Thank you again, Kyle, for being there. Not only is Kyle covering this, but he's also on our team, like helping out wherever he can. So thank you so much, Kyle, for that. I mean, I wish we were there. We were planning all along to be there, but COVID pretty much changed up things at the last minute. So, I mean, travel restrictions added to our busy schedule just meant that we couldn't attend, and it's really killing us not to be there with the team.
But we're so fortunate to have such an amazing team out there and working on the car. We really couldn't have done it without our team. We couldn't have done it without our supporters. We couldn't have done it without Dave, who basically loaned us a car to potentially, damage or destroy at Pikes Peak, all for one reason.
And the reason for me, when Blake came to us with this idea, I got to be honest, I'm a newbie to racing. I know nothing about it. I didn't come at this EV world from racing. And part of me was like, who cares? But then I realized a lot of the world cares. A lot of kids grow up learning about driving from race car driving, and they put posters on their walls and they follow race car drivers. And so if they're going to learn about the world of EVs from winning races, that's a great introduction to EVs. It's not my introduction to them, but it is the way most people think about cars.
Because, again, it's all about being the best. And for a long, long time, EVs were not the best. They were the best if you cared about if you were some kind of hippie. And they were the best if you want the most efficient car in the world. But they weren't the fastest. They weren't the most exciting. And the great part about Tesla is that they were the company to take electric cars and change them from golf carts, which for some reason we had just stopped at golf carts and said, well, this is about as good as we're going to go. Maybe we'll make the EV one. But other than that, forget it. And they took it into really amazing, fast sports cars and stuff like that. And I think that that's why it's so important to have a car on Pikes Peak that you can buy today. This Performance Model 3, sure, we ripped all the seats and the headliner out of it, but it's got the same motor, it's got the same battery, it's got the same suspension. We just put on some new tires, some new wheels, and we had to put on a noisemaker and a roll cage. But aside from that, it's the same darn car that you can go to any Tesla showroom in the world and see.
And it's tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars cheaper than one of these other race cars you're seeing. Those are specialty built cars that are one-of-a-kind pieces. This is a car that anyone can get their hands on. If they're into racing, it's actually a fairly inexpensive way to get into it.
And we're doing this on a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
We didn't have super deep pockets here. We basically had as much as whatever everyone would give us from the community.
Yeah.
And we have been able to not only get a race car, outfit it with all the equipment that we needed. We were also able to get it to Pikes Peak, get everyone on our team out to Pikes Peak, and race and compete at Pikes Peak for, I think, total, if you include the cost of the car, well under $100,000.
We're probably the cheapest team on the mountain this year. I don't know that for a fact, but I think we've got to be. And most ICE car teams spend most of their time working on the car. I can't stress that enough. Like, as I've learned about racing, most of your time you need a whole bunch of mechanics because you got to tweak things all the time. Don't forget, as you go up Pikes Peak, there's less oxygen. Bad for the driver, but bad for an ICE engine because it gets weaker and weaker as it goes up the mountain. It's sucking air that doesn't give it oxygen.
Right, because fire needs oxygen.
Right. EVs don't need oxygen.
Right.
And so
we could be running this on the moon and
Exactly.
it would still work with some temperature issues, but you could work those out.
And the other thing I just want to mention is that as I've been studying the history of racing, I've learned that there's been many times throughout the history where there's been a change that came about where most of the people in the industry said that's a crazy change, like maybe some aerodynamic change to the car. And at first, every other team stands back and is like, yeah, you go ahead and race that car. And then if that works, they all switch because they want to win. And that is what's happening now with EVs. As we switch to electric, there may be guys who are like, yeah, I don't know about that. It looks kind of too wimpy. It sounds quiet, whatever. If we start winning races, guess what they'll be doing in a few years?
Buying electric cars. And those people will then go on to be telling their families about which cars they should be buying, not for racing, but for everyday purchases and driving around. And if the electric cars are safer, cheaper, like vastly cheaper to maintain, both on a race course and in your driveway, the obvious choice is going to be apparent to a lot of these car buying decision makers, and we're going to change the world.
So one of the records we're going for on Sunday is Blake's old record. In 2016, he was the fastest EV production car in the Model S Performance. He's going to try and break that record on Sunday.
With a cheaper car.
With a cheaper car.
And team and everything that is cheaper than the sticker price of the car that he bought to race up Pikes Peak in 2016.
Yeah.
That is the amazing part. That car was well over $100,000, just the car. Plus, on top of everything that he had to spend on that car to get it up Pikes Peak, this year we're well under just the sticker price of the Model S alone.
So anyway, thanks for
Hang on, wait. This just in. We're getting a report from Kyle Connor of Out of Spec Motoring.
So it's in the middle of the night with Unplugged Performance. They're rebuilding their race car with parts from this donor Model 3 Performance. Little did this Model 3 know it was going to turn into a race car. You can see the busted up subframes here. All of these joints just completely buckled, super unhappy. And then of course we have the new subframes going in the Unplugged Performance Model 3. It's definitely a good sign, good story, never give up. And this thing will go up the mountain, I should say. A little bit battle scarred, but hey, racing's rough and this is perseverance. Pretty dang cool.
Wow. So it sounds like the Unplugged Performance team might just pull this off.
Yeah, I mean, if they're able to replace the broken parts in time and get the car to pass safety check on Sunday morning, they could be back in the race.
And let's remind everyone, Blake and Randy are not racing head-to-head. We are going for different records with different classes of car. Unplugged Performance is running a modified car, and we are running a production car.
But it's still going to be exciting to see if Randy can get his car back in the race, and if there will be 2 Model 3s or only 1 running up Pikes Peak this year.
Right. So, fingers crossed, everybody. Knock on wood. Go Blake, go team. Let's see if we can beat the record at Pikes Peak.
And we'll see you on Monday on Tesla Time News to let you know some of the results.
Thank you so much for watching, everybody.
Now you know.